All right, I think we're in record mode, so we can record our first kickoff 2023 with our book club series. And I want to say hi to the world. I am Jennifer Smith, director at the Encompassing Center, a mental health center on the west side of Chicago. And I'm here with my lovely, diverse team, which I love them so much. We got Diamond, if you want to wave, say hey.
Hi, everyone.
Spencer, our Black male therapist in this center, which we love so much. And then we got Pamela, our bilingual clinician as well. She does a lot of good work. She will get you straight with the anger management skills if you need that. But I'll get to the nitty gritty and the good stuff that we have going today. And so we decided as the center to present you guys videos each month on various topics about trauma. And it's intended to have those difficult conversations, motivate you all as a community to talk about things that impact us greatly as a whole, and then do it through books. So who doesn't love a great book, a great novel, something you can get from the library? So our first month book is My Grandmother's Hands. And this book is by Resmaa Menakem, and he's a great social worker doing some great things. He is a healer, New York best time seller. He's a trauma specialist, social worker. He's worked in military schools, police department, and we know that's a hot topic, which we'll discuss today. And he's done a lot of work with somatic experiences. So that's one thing that is really important in the mental health world. When talk therapy doesn't work, we got to go with senses in our bodies. And he's worked with one person that's really deep in the body and the somatics, which, if you guys know, The Body Keeps the Score is a really great book. So he's actually worked with that author on some things too. So he also appeared, if you guys are a YouTube fan, on the Comedy Central, The God Honest Truth with Charlemagne. You guys Google that. He's also with the author of the Unapologetically Black Mental Health, which we will be covering this series, and Michelle Williams from Destiny's Child. So check that out on YouTube. If anybody wants the link, just shout it out once we post, and then we'll give you that link. But one thing that really stands out for me with this novel is that he pays homage to Dr. Joy DeGruy, I believe it is, from post-traumatic slave syndrome, which we will touch base on next month. And he talks a lot about Black trauma, violence that has been inflicted on us and our bodies, especially as African Americans, and how that trauma can get passed down, and how we continue to live in that shadow of trauma over and over in generations to come. So the book we chose for January is pretty much looking at white body supremacy. And this is not a racial conversation. This is not Black against whites or even shunning the police, but thinking about how this concept of white came to be. And we know this term has been around for a really long time. I want to say like 1680 is what our author mentions. And so there's this sense of pain that goes down among those that are not superior. So the white body versus the Black body is a concept he uses a lot. In that Black bodies are often seen as like these superhumans. They're hypersexual, they're dirty, all these judgments that become internalized. And then we continue to suffer from these thoughts as they continue on through history. And one thing I love about this book is that he breaks down the history of this trauma from white bodies down to Black bodies. And we see that as early amongst white bodies in the Middle Ages from within Europe, those that are low privileged amongst the higher elite. And then we see them head over to America, right? And then we see the trauma inflicted on the natives. And then we see them go back to another country where we see African enslavement, where we're taking these particular Black bodies and bringing them over, and that enslavement piece. And then we see Jim Crow, where, okay, Black bodies are good, but they're still segregated, right? And then we get to neocro and today where we're seeing things like, you know, police brutality, driving while black, we see incidents like George Floyd, incidences where you see like a white person, a black person in an elevator, and the white person is clutching their purse because they believe the black person would harm them. So we see a lot of those things, but one of the biggest way is to have disregard for that is we don't listen or pay attention, or we don't acknowledge someone's lived experiences. So today's topics will be based off of a lot of topics from this book. And we want to kick it off with talking about our brains. Like, where does this trauma start and where did it originate? And we're going to go straight to this lizard brain. And that's where we talk about flight, fright, freeze, where we scan on our outside and we respond to the inputs that come in. And so I want to present this question to the group of the lizard brain. How do you guys talk to clients or teach someone, especially when you're working in a therapy setting, about this idea of lizard brain and what Resmaa talks about? So I'll open the floor as that our first question.
Well, I guess the way he kind of describes it in the book is kind of like your impulses, not really thinking much with your mind, but something like your body can just kind of do. So when I think how it like connects with a lizard is, I don't know if you guys see how like their tongue goes by really fast. So it's not something, that even takes like a couple seconds to think. It's just like your body reacting to something in the environment.
Yeah, and I find it helpful usually to point out that these impulses or responses are beyond ancient. These have existed before humans even existed, and you see them in nature everywhere. And sometimes it can be helpful. It's a way for us to survive. And then sometimes it comes up in situations where, we actually aren't like just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, just trying to normalize it at first, for the client, because a lot of the times they feel like they're just this weird person who experiences these things. And it's just like, well, no, other people experience them too, and this is what they are. But how do we, kind of try to rationalize or try to kind of create these skills or coping skills to help you to be able to address them when triggers come around or in different situations. But mostly, kind of normalizing them and giving that education in the beginning helps them a lot to kind of feel like, okay, this is not just a me thing.
Yeah. And then I guess those lizard responses would be the fight, flight, and the new one they added, which is freeze.
Yeah, fight, flight, flee, and freeze. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're either going to shut down, not do anything, you're going to run, you're going to flight, or you're just you can be present, but kind of dissociate and not be present when things happen. That's traumatic for the person. So he talks about this thing, he calls it a soul nerve, but it's a real nerve, vagus nerve in the body. And it connects throughout your whole system. And it's kind of like the largest organ in the autonomic, like your nervous system. And so it's connected everywhere. But then when it comes to your brain, it's like, it's connected to the lizard brain and not like that frontal where all the thinking and all the good stuff come, where you can problem solve and all that good stuff. And so when you're relaxed and chill, right, it's working good. There's no problem. You're energized. You're ready to take on the world. You're full of life. But then when things get restricted and you go in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that, it can shut completely down. And so, but we know this nerve is very vital to our wellness and health. And then it regulates everything, like way that we breathe, heart pressure, inflammation that we have in our body, pain, and all that stuff. So we got to be mindful of that plays a big role, and we got to take care of that. And so when we're thinking about trauma, what is trauma? Is it just an emotional response? Not really, because it can be collective, right? And so it's not just what happens to you. It's not just a sexual assault event or, you know, being pulled over by the police or things like that, but it's a protective response. It's how even after the event you can respond to the things that happen. And then it's how you perceive things as dangerous. That's the key thing when we think about trauma. If you see a perceived danger, so say you're in a school setting and a kid just pops off, right? And you're wondering, why is this teacher just asked him a simple question. That kid is seeing something that's a danger with this adult. And we have to facilitate something to help them feel protected. And so it can show up in your physical and sensations within your body. And that when you see it, sometimes what do we think? We see it, we see the judgment, oh, he's acting inappropriate, right? Or that person is they're blowing something out of proportion, she's tripping, right? We see those things and we have to realize that's the person's body way of protecting itself. And we have to realize too that some things get passed down in our family genes. And then we think what we just talked about historically, and then they become the standard response for communities and for families. Oh, that's how we always act. You know, we be ready to fight everywhere we go. And it's like, no, that this could be a trauma response for you. And so I want to bring this question to the group. Like, what are some ways you've seen trauma responses of individuals you've worked with? And it doesn't necessarily have to be individuals that are specifically at the center, because we want to make sure our clients are safe and confidentially, but just in your grand scope of work, how have you seen people respond when there's trauma in their bodies?
So I've seen the sort of overly charged, out of proportion responses that you mentioned. And then there's also sort of the opposite of that, where responses in the body get suppressed. And so not always, but it tends to happen more often with men, is there's a sort of response that's like, oh, like, this doesn't bother me, I'm cool, it's just dirt off my shoulder. And they're like overly quiet about it, or they are avoiding it or refusing to acknowledge it. And then another one I see that's interesting sometimes is a traumatic event will happen, and then we don't see the response until much later. The timing is way off. And so an event can happen, and then there's no symptoms or there's no responses. And then some other event can happen that it can remind you of that earlier event. And then you start to see the physical symptoms or the behavioral symptoms.
Right.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah, I think for me, something that I've seen a lot was just like, you know, getting into those deep conversations with a lot of people is something they'll say right away, like before you even start talking, would be like, well, it's really hard for me to trust people. And I think that in itself is a trauma response, just because they've been so used to, you know, having mistrust or getting hurt when they open up maybe a little bit too much about themselves. But I know that's a big one that I think is definitely like a trauma response. You know, as someone who does a lot of anger management, I definitely have to say that aggression, you know, is a trauma response in itself. You know, I rather like, you know, act tough than think, you know, I'm weak or have someone walk all over me, or I rather get that person first before they get me. And, you know, being in Chicago, I think we see a lot, you know, the men front, or men just like walking down the streets, like, you know, and they could be the sweetest people ever. But I think that in itself is a trauma response, like, you know, don't mess with me, don't hurt me. So I rather look and act tough than, you know, think that you can just hurt me in any way. So yeah.
Yeah, that resting face.
Yeah, those are, you know, a lot of the common ones I've seen. You know, the most for me has been like the shutting down and not trusting. Mostly the shutting down. I've had people, you know, I'm just not going to tell my feelings because of all my life, me expressing my feelings didn't mean anything, you know. So it's just going to be thrown back in my face, or it's just going to be, you know, not a reason for me to really share my feelings, because it's not going to change anything. or I'm still going to end up getting hurt. So let me just not say anything. And also, like, Pam said, having a hard time opening up and trusting people, talking about the situation. And another one is just using other things to cope. This thing happens to me, or this thing has triggered these emotions, these memories, and now I'm going to go and smoke cigarettes. I'm going to go and drink. Those are like the most common ones people do. Or smoke other substances also. Those are the most common things people do, but they start to develop another addiction to help them cope with the trauma. So now it's the two issues, now you're dealing with, instead of just the one.
Right. Right. No one wakes up saying, I want to be an alcoholic, or I want to use substances, or I want to be angry, right? It's usually secondary to something more traumatic, or just, again, if we're talking about experiences, even if a person had what would be normal, which we will address a book called The Myth Call of Normal later down this year, but the collective things that happen in the community, looking at the news, looking at what's happening with everyone else. And that kind of brings us into the second topic of secondary and vicarious trauma, where it may not be something that directly happened to you, but you've witnessed it. And so what the author does in this book is he picks a hot topic, which is the police. And we know this has been a very strong topic, especially in communities of color, and especially the things that we've seen down to, from George Floyd, like I mentioned earlier, and just recently on the news, the last 24 to 48 hours, where African-American cops have taken a Black body's life. So those things are really pinpointed in there. And one thing that I've shared with the group prior to us doing this informational book club training / let's just have this conversation is he did a beautiful job in sharing, not to bash the police. So we're not here to bash the police or say anything, but to highlight the two things that he did mention that's very important in understanding vicarious trauma. And one of the points he made is that officers are not often trained on how to discharge the excess energy that comes in their body due to the traumatic events that they have out in the field. Because as we talked, if we're talking about generational stuff, like something that's genetic passed down just from us being people of color, then we throw their own stuff from their own childhood and growing up, that trauma. And then we have the trauma of the streets, right? All those things are compacted in one body, and they have to go out and protect and serve. We just talked about the responses, the anger, the throwing things out of proportion. How is that manifested in the police, in their own bodies, and how having this chronic type of stress in your body day in and day out to lead to even the police using substances and misconduct, being isolated. We've seen an increase in police suicides. That's becoming a very hot topic on the news. And so we have all these things colliding together that sometimes now the police are kind of in this soldiering state too, where they're always on hyper alert and protect and take out any threat necessary. And so trauma, we say that to agree with the author, that trauma is never reasonable sometimes, but can be a reflex and a protective factor, and it doesn't always have the reasoning mind. But also too, there's a fine line too in how we rationalize that as well. We can't make that as our justification for taking lives in some cases as well. So I want to shoot out this question to you all. When we're talking about the police or sharing our thoughts with or listening as clinicians and providers, what are some of the things you guys have heard from people when the community talks about police?
It's really not a positive thing. I think it's kind of split, and I feel like it's split between some of the older generations and the younger generations. Mm-hmm. The older generations, they are calling, they see the police as a protective people. You know, if you're not doing anything wrong, you know, these consequences wouldn't happen. And, you know, when I'm calling is for, you know, someone's doing stuff to me, you know. They still see them as this protective factor, whereas you have the younger generations or the generations and the people that's living in these other certain communities, they're seeing, you know, people just come in with this perspective on them already, you know, so this already coming in with this demeanor, coming into this neighborhood, try to address this situation, but you already have this demeanor, you already have this guard up, and it's not like, hey, I'm just trying to come here and help, what's going on, you know. So it's that also, you know, not having them to come at all, you know, depending on where you are, what time of day it is, or whatever, you know, whatever it is, you can possibly call and no one shows up, you know, because of whatever reason, you know, they're short or they need other people in other areas, or some of them are just really just scared to go to certain areas at certain times, so they don't go. But those are some of the main ones that I've heard.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think I would say something similar to Diamond. You know, growing up Mexican American, I feel like, you know, as a little girl, our community was always kind of afraid of the police, whether it's immigration issues, even if you weren't like, you know, here undocumented, it was still something scary. I remember like playing in the neighborhood and kids just yelling like the cops, and everybody just starts like, even if it's for fun, playing, like everybody just starts running. And it like, you know, that definitely is a trauma response, something that like is passed down through our parents or grandparents of not feeling safe. Um, yeah, it's really interesting, but you know, and I think I definitely do see that in our community as well, where you know, people just say that like walking through, you know, the police station, or because we're very close to the police station, you're like, oh, it takes a lot for me, you know, to come to your center, or, you know, I feel like my heart's racing when I see a cop behind me, even though I know, you know, I have a license with me, everything's okay. Or they begin to feel a little uncomfortable. I think those are definitely some trauma responses that, you know, I see a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are good. I've heard from what both of you have said before. Also, yeah, a lot of distrust. People are very weary of police officers, and people are often, you know, very willing to acknowledge that there are many officers who are respectful, but they've had enough bad experiences, or they know people, or the people in their family had enough bad experiences with officers that they can't know at the beginning of interaction with officer whether how this is going to go, and so oftentimes people, their body is already responding to just the presence of a police officer there, and before the words are even exchanged. And I also hear that the presence of officers can be very tiring, which is a common trauma response. It can be draining. So I've heard someone say they had an interaction with the officer, and then they went home and they took a long nap afterwards. I think that's a common trauma response.
Yeah, yeah. Just to add to Spencer's, yeah, I think not calling the police in times of danger, or, you know, of times where there's like accidents, is a trauma response too, because, you know, they're more afraid to, you know, have a cop being involved or the police force than actually, you know, being safe or feeling, getting the help they may deserve. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And so the author does a really good job. Like his biggest takeaway was to making sure that officers are taking care of themselves and they're learning to manage their own trauma experiences, whether it's vicarious, just being in the field, the stuff that's in their own childhood. You know, there's so many reasons why officers be cops, you know, and because they are looked up to their family because their uncle was a police officer, or having really bad experiences and want to do something positive and give back. But he definitely emphasized that. That's on page 216 if you guys have the book and want to read and check out what he talks about. But again, there's always that fine line that we teach clients too, that, you know, can also apply in this situation. Where's the justification? How do we handle when there's a lizard brain going crazy, right? But then the actions that come after. And so I know you guys work with a variety of kids and adults. How do we help clients make sense of that, you know, where yes, we understand the lizard brain is going crazy, but it doesn't justify you to go and beat up your friend, or, you know, put something nasty on social media, or, you know, how to settle that brain down.
I usually start by explaining that there is, you know, a whole variety of different kinds of reactions you can have. And even if you are reacting to a injustice, some kinds of reactions are socially acceptable and some kinds of reactions are not, and are going to be considered by other people to be unsafe. And some kind of reactions can actually be unsafe. And so the work that people can do with therapists and elsewhere is to start to practice more of the reactions that can be safe and can be considered socially acceptable.
Yeah. I think an example of how like maybe this can look like is saying like a sexual assault survivor being like brushed, you know, on the shoulder, or accidentally getting touched in like a place that may be filled with people, and their first reaction, like their lizard brain, may be to like, you know, hurt someone or push them away from their body. And like, because their body wants to protect themselves and it's, you know, afraid and fear, that may feel like the right thing to do. But at the same time, they need to understand that that's coming from, you know, past traumas and past abuse, and really reminding them and grounding them to help them understand that, you know, maybe a brush on the shoulder doesn't mean they're in trouble, or doesn't mean it's just like they're trying to be attacked or targeted by the other person, even though their body still senses the trauma and is, you know, trying to defend themselves and protect themselves. That's not the actual reality of what's going on in the moment, even though their body remembers. That's exactly not what's going on. And just helping them differentiate that through like grounding techniques and exercises and practices.
Yeah, I think when I was learning about this, like coming, you know, through my master's program, someone explained it, one of my supervisors explained it as like your brain like keeps a file cabinet. It's like a file cabinet. And once one of those trauma, you know, events happen, it stores it in the file cabinet. So when something comes, or like Pam was just using that as an example, someone brushing your shoulder and you were a sexual assault victim, you know, your brain is automatically going to go to, oh, the last time my arm was brushed like that, this was going on and it was that sexual assault. So this is how you need to react. And, you know, it's just a point of, you know, that's normal, you know, how your body is responding because it's based off of what has happened to you and it wants just to protect you. But, you know, sometimes our body could just go in defense mode at that moment and not properly judge what's going on. So, you know, how do we take a step back and be able to judge what's going on, you know, not take too long to where if it's you know, is a dangerous situation, you know, we're, you know, not judging properly and letting the thing happen. But if it's not one of those situations, how what would help us to be able to judge in the moment what's happening, what level of danger we're at, you know, what is a response that we need. And if our bodies is just kind of reacting and we see there's no danger there, how do we just, you know, bring us down to like level one? How do we calm ourselves? What coping mechanisms do we have? Just like Pam was saying.
Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. And I know one thing that he did mention that we discussed a little bit is the idea of body over policy, and the officers making sure they're, one, taking care of their bodies and addressing that, but also two, how does that impact, do we just neglect policy pieces too, because we want to be able to let like officers know that places like the encompassing center are available for those services. And I know there's a police culture and there's sensitivity and things that safety net needs to be taking place, but what are some of the things that we can do policy wise to make sure that services are available and that people that are in law enforcement, and it's just not CPD or police, it could be security officers, it could be officers that are at courts, things like that. There are a variety of people that are in an authority figure that are there to protect and serve in some capacity. So what do we think about that? Like, what can we continue to do as far as policies? And EC is one of those where mental health centers shut down and the community took over and it's like, hey, we need this to have access, even if you are unable to pay. What should policies be looked at, or what should we do about policies when it comes to just policing and protecting our communities?
I think one thing that would help, as far as mental health, continuing to make these services, out there, letting people know that they exist, letting people know that if they're free, letting people know that they're free. But as far as, policies, you know, even when some things like EAP, some companies have EAP to where you can go and it's optional. Some people, some companies, when it comes to like different drug things, they don't directly fire you. They make you go down EAP and get this type of counseling because they're trying to help you with a problem. And that's how they're seeing it. And I feel like some companies need to bring that in more, and also just pushing in the beginning. Let's start with some mental health instead of here's the policies, here's how to do this, here's how to do that. Where are you mentally? Because no one spends no time actually talking about that. These are the kind of things that I went through. These are the kind of things that happened. This is why I became a police. This is the type of trauma that I kind of been through. Okay, and now let's kind of release that before you get into the field and start to talk to people or start to interact with people, making it, I feel like, a part of the whole, how people come in and do orientation for these weeks or trainings for these weeks. Let's do that, but mental health wise for these people, because I guarantee you, I feel like even if it's not a police, just even if it's, a different company, pushing products out, and we can give more mental health awareness and let them release things a little bit more, I think more harmony and more, sensibility and more being able to understand each other and just be more, empathetic with people more so than harsh with people, which is naturally a bee.
Yeah. I know something he said in the book that I kind of kept with me as well is to kind of remember like the importance of policy and history, which was pretty much like policy has like in America has like roots in slavery and racism. And I think being very mindful of that, because, policy can change over time, but our bodies can still stay the same with the trauma like kept in. So I think that way, that he put so much importance in the body first to make sure that we change, our own, genetics for future generations. And because, and just be mindful of policy that, it is rooted in a lot, of racism, and being mindful of that is really important.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting point that kept coming up in the book where he says we need to do our healing, our bodies first, our internal work first before policy. And sometimes it caught me off guard because he has a master's in social work background, and from my experience as a social worker, we're trained to think of them all as interacting with each other and intersecting with each other. And so you can do policy changes can influence the individual, and the individual can influence policy, and vice versa. And And he does mention certain policies, like some departments have arrest quotas. And so that the result of that is that in order to fulfill arrest quotas, officers are going to the most marginalized neighborhoods, which are most often Black and brown neighborhoods. Anyway, yeah, so I was a bit confused about that point, and also curious what all of y'all thought about that. Apologies if I'm jumping the gun, but yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. It's so systemic. It's, you fix one piece, but then it can be very discouraging when you have like an arrest quota or things like that. And Pamela, you made a good point. A lot of things are rooted in things that are racialized. It's like, it impacts certain groups over others. And even if the colors are the same, it can be in a poor white neighborhood and have very similar experiences because of that trauma, where there may be more drug use and, low income, poor individuals too. So it's still people being victims to these policies in a way, or unfair sentencings, or, even with good policy changes. I believe something overturned where like people with really small charges were being released, but then there were issues with the communities, like where are these individuals going with no support? Like what's the interventions that you're going to bring with the individuals that being released back into the communities, even though the charges are minor? So it could be a really tricky topic, but I think the main thing that he wants to know is that, even outside of everything that's going on, and we tell our little kids that in the classroom could be chaotic, but you can be in charge and keep your hands to yourself, and the nice words that you say out of your mouth, and not being a bully, and, taking care of you is still priority, at the end of the day. So we do what we can. Like, we're all clinicians in a sense, and we can't change everyone. And we know that when we have a caseload of 30 and 2 are really making progress, and then the others are slowly moving, and it's like, are we doing a bad job? No, it's people it takes time. Just like policies, it takes time. We don't stop, because look where we're at. Just civil rights movement was just last night, if you think about it, just not that long ago. You think of the 60s, 50s and 60s, and it's like, this is where our parents had to endure, and here we are still sometimes feeling the same, but then we've seen so much progression too. So we got to do both. I don't think we can do one or the other. I think we have to do both concurrently and parallel at the same time. So, but in thinking that, it leads us into our last topic about healing that he brings up. And he suggests that the first step is education, which is what this group of book club topics are going to be about, educating you guys on things that you have access to. If they say that if you want to hide something, put it in a book. No, we're exposing these books and letting you guys know what's hidden, and so you guys can go out and educate yourself. And then it's going to be slowly and over time, like we just talked about. We just was in the civil rights movement in the 60s. It's slow but progressive, and it's not done in a vacuum. Like, we can't do one and done. Like, it's impacting neighborhoods and communities in this collective body he talks about. And so I wanted to share with you guys. I wanted you guys to share, and I know Spencer is going to cut out on us shortly, but if he has a few minutes to chime in, and then he can cut out and us girls will finish our book club conversation. What are some ways we can collectively do this healing in our community?
Oh, wow, that's a really big question to end on.
I know.
I would say, yeah, making connections. And I really appreciate here at the EC, our outreach coordinator is doing a great job of making connections between different organizations and community abroad, and going to different sites and introducing ourselves to the community. And so I think that's a great start. And I think also just becoming aware, like a lot of people are still learning about trauma in the body. And so just learning sort of the fundamentals of the psychoeducation of it, I think that would be a wonderful start. But so thanks for letting me join the conversation, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Spencer. We'll see you at one of our next books.
Sounds good.
All right, ladies, it's just us. So how do you do community and community healing collectively over time?
So I just finished watching the Comedy Central clip,
Yes.
and he says something that like I absolutely loved, and he said taking up space. And I
Okay.
was like, oh my God, yes. And he said, I think he said in the Comedy Central, he's like, you know, as people of color, Black, Americans really taking up space and letting that fuel you. So I think in EC, I think it's really cool how like there's so many Black therapists. Like I remember getting an email saying like, hey Pam, like one of our students is requesting Black therapists. I know it's really rare, but by any chance you have an idea? I'm like, oh, we have plenty, and I know that definitely fuels us in the work that we do, to really, and then it also fuels our clients because they come in and they feel seen, especially like Diamond, who is mostly in a school that's predominantly Black. Like the kids love her. They're like, I see myself in her, and I look up to her, and I know that in itself is very healing. And same for me when I was in school and there was like one Latina professor. I was like, oh my God, I want to be you. And just taking up space and not letting us feel down or feeling like we don't deserve to be there. And just very much letting that fuel us and continue us to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's so important. Seeing people that look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And, with Illinois having a workforce shortage, it's like we want to encourage more people that are compassionate about this work to come in the field. So we can get more. That would be amazing. We need more clinicians of color. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely clinicians of color representation, I think, is big. And kind of changing the stereotypical thought processes about this help or what this help entails. A lot of people think that, it's just someone coming to tell them what to do, or it's for crazy people, these resources are coming to the centers and doing this and doing that, but just opening up and letting them know, hey, you could just come in and just talk, it doesn't have to be something so traumatic. And even if it's, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to be, open and honest with you. Have you be open and honest, express how you feel, be able to process that and move forward. On top of them knowing about the resources and being able to access them, just knowing what the resource actually is and how it can help them in so many different ways. And trying to, change those different narratives. And, kind of on the path of what Pam said about being everywhere, also just not waiting for people to come to us, but us just going out and just being there, going out and, just being present more, without waiting on, someone to be looking for the resource, even like random days of mental health at school, or random days of mental health, at these different organizations. So they could be like, oh, this is kind of what this feels like. Oh, this is, this actually helps. Okay, well, maybe I want to learn more. Maybe I want to, do more. Maybe I want to, actually come in. I've even had teachers at one of the schools be like, okay, do you guys talk to teachers? And I'm like, yeah, you come in. I'm like, you come in, set up, we can talk to you, But, I try to give out just so many resources to anyone that we talk to. And just like Spencer was saying, how we outreach and connect is just a big thing, and I love that with our center also.
I also think it's important, as a white person, to also call things out, and he puts it in the book, which I loved. But like, if you notice, like you both came at the same time, there's a Black person, like allowing the person to be like, okay, go ahead. Or if you feel like somebody walks in who's Black, say good morning to them first, before the white counterpart. If you feel like there is, somebody like says to me like, oh, like, come here first. I'm like, actually, they were here first. Or pointing out people like, is it because they're Black? I think He also gave a really good message in the book for people who are white to really like look for and be careful of their actions and their thoughts overall. And I think with this practice, it overall helps the whole healing as collectively, for the white population as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. And with that, he recommends teaching that soul nerve we talked about and doing some training, and he broke it down into anchors. And so the first one was soothing yourself, and two, noticing how you react instead of reacting, and then accepting those uncomfortable discomfort that sometimes happens when you're in spaces, and then staying present. And then the anchor 5 was just safely discharging any of that extra energy that's in our bodies that's trauma related. And so thinking about that, what are some of the recommendations you guys have for doing some of those things? Because they can be taken out of proportion and done in a traumatic trauma response way. So, I'm gonna soothe myself, I'm gonna pour a drink, I'm gonna smoke a blunt, and I'm gonna go to bed. And it's like, that may be contributing more. Or what do you mean accept discomfort? I don't like the way this feels. Like, are you telling me to accept things that are bad? And it's no. Sometimes with there is a modality that do that, the acceptance and commitment. It's like sometimes things are what it is, and I'm going to say that, okay, I know this is bad, but I'm going to move forward and not allowing this to continue to prevent me from doing the things I need to do. And I'm going to move forward, whether it's teaching kids about good touch, bad touch, and teaching people about healthy relationships and finding healthy relationships for myself, because I can't change the sexual assault that happened, or I can't change being carjacked, or I can't change how the police treated me, but I can accept that as what it was, and I can do more about it for myself or on a public stance, whether it's policy or community change. So what are some of the things you guys have to teach some of those anchors he mentions in the book? Or any good tips, or if you have one word to share with clients or those you encounter with staying anchored. And I like that word because it feels grounded. Like you can't move. It's like a boat. You anchor it and it's not going anywhere, even if it's a storm.
I would say, learning to do this will all be worth it in the end. Mm-hmm. I always say it's easier said than done, because I don't want the client to feel like you can be able to do this and not, notice that this is a difficult thing to do when you're being triggered, or, you're in these situations to where it's just like all of these emotions and stuff is happening. So it's hard to even think about it. But noticing, the regulation that is going to come with it. The more you practice, the more you'll be able to do it. The more you'll be able to do it, the more you can kind of prevent it from happening, in so many situations, the decretion, looking for the goal. We're going to the goal. We're going to the light, the light at the end of the tunnel. And while it's hard now, while I know there's triggers now, while I know that also we have to think about actually protecting ourselves and not letting things that are harmful, get us, but rationalizing and being able to figure out what can I do that in the moment that can just calm me and let me be free. One thing I did learn was about the senses, the taste, the smell, the touch, these different things that you can use to calm you down. You may want to look at something or notice 5 things that's red to be able to calm you down, or eat something that's spicy because it's going to distract you and it gives your mind that moment to calm down and be able to breathe and think rationally. Practicing and finding those different things that you could do in a moment. And one place I like to use as a easy place to try to develop these things is work, because you can't do these drinking, you can't do certain things when you're at work. So if somebody trying you at work, or if there's a trigger at work or something like that, what are some of those things that you can do? Because now you can use all of those things everywhere you go, you know, if you're using them at work, basically, you know. And then that helps to not bring in those negative, like, you know, drinking habits or smoking habits that's not helpful, you know, and try to stray away from those.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess my recommendation when doing like the 5 anchors would be to take it slow. When I was reading, you know, the book and he was going through some very graphic activities, which, you know, y'all will definitely go through, and it
The book, y'all, is good.
yeah, it was really good. But at first I remember trying to like, I was like, oh, I'm gonna read this book in like a day and a half and I'll get through it super quickly, but you can't. No, like you really have to take your time, and it has to be a while, at least a week, because I just was feeling like so unsettled. And then I would try to do the anchor things, and I'm like, wait, take it slow, breathe, you know, ground myself, you know, release that energy, whether it's through exercise or just walking around. But yeah, because I feel like I was trying to do this so quickly. I did the exercise, I was feeling like some trauma in my body. I felt so uncomfortable. And I was like, wait, let me just take this slow. And there's a point in the book where he's like, take 30 minutes, take a break right now. And I needed that so much. And I think I watched George Lopez, one of the comedy shows, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready, I'm back. So yeah, just take it slow. Don't be so hard on yourself if you don't get it on the first try. And yeah, just keep on practicing.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. And yeah, it's a lot of good gems in that book. So like I shared, get it, read it. It'll definitely be educational. We are not sponsors, Resmaa, so we're just, you know, community healers ready to use the resources that we have that are free. Go to your local library, get a library card, find the book, rent it. If you guys need a book or want a book, reach out to us and we'll see how to find it for you or gift it to you or something. If that's, it means you'll go to your communities and educate others. And so we're doing this definitely out of love and out of education and care, and just, you know, it's good to have these difficult conversations. And so as we wrap up, we're ending our book club hour. Ladies, is there any last minute things that was in the book that you just are dying to share and just want to make sure people know if they're not able to have the time to read? As Pavla said, you got to take it slow, or not readers, but we want to make sure people are educated. Any last takeaways before we end this book series for January for My Grandmother's Hands?
Yeah. My takeaway, I guess, is, and you know, to let everyone know, is listen to your body. I feel like we're always so hard about like overthinking, always thinking about our emotions. Why are we thinking that way? But we often forget or don't know how really listen to our body. And I get this a lot where, you know, as an anger management therapist, clients are like, I'm mad this morning. And I'm like, did you have breakfast? And they're like, no. Did you sleep 7 to 8 hours? They're like, I slept 4. I'm like, And it's like, you know, it's so real to see that like sometimes we don't even can differentiate between anger and hunger. And like, imagine if like we can't do these things, all the little trauma that is really acting up in our body, the stress. And yeah, we just really need to listen more to our body, be in tune. And I know it's really hard, but it really made me realize, like, you know, not everything is always in the mind. It's definitely very much in the body.
Yep.
Yeah, so you know, the book has so many things and I can go on so many tangents about them, but you know, basically, you know, what Pamela said was, you know, just listening to the body, and just paying attention to the things that you go through, you know, the things that you feel, you know, the things that you may even think about. You know, and take time to address them, even if it's slowly. And that really just kind of goes back into just get to know you. Get to know you. Take the real time to get to know you. And I know that, you know, depending on who you are and what your situation is, there may be a lot of things going on right now, to where it makes it hard to be able to take the time to think about you. But even if it's like 10 minutes a day, you know, 30 minutes a day, just take some time to just sit and think about it, or just sit and pay attention to yourself. And it can just help so much. It can help you just regulate yourself so much.
Those are beautiful tips. I love it. I definitely am a work in progress and doing those things every day too myself. So we're not superior. We're not superhuman. We're just like you all. And so I want to thank you ladies for joining me this month. And I will be seeing you guys next month. We will be addressing our next book, the post-traumatic slave syndrome, just in time for Black History Month. And if you guys ever need help or assistance, the Encompassing Center is located at 3019 West Harrison in Chicago. We cover North Lawndale near West Side and East and West Garfield Park. All of our services are no cost due to you all coming as a community and paying for those community services. And if you need to reach us, we're at 773-638-5703. So if you ladies don't have anything else, I think we did amazing diving through this book. We want to give, if Resmaa sees this, we want to say thank you for gifting us a book for education and talking about very difficult topics like trauma and the police and healing and being anchored. So we thank you. And yeah, no last thoughts. Any last words, ladies?
I'm excited for our next one.
Same.
You guys want to check them out. They have openings. They are ready to help you with your healing all day, every day. So thank you guys. Thanks the community. Thank everyone. So all right. I'll see you guys next month for our next book.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.